Elite Physique University, your source for all things physique enhancement. Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Elite Physique University. I'm John Gorman, your host for the day, and we are back with part 2, answering all your ketogenic questions with Ben Azadi. Ben, welcome back to the show, man. It's been a whole whopping 30 seconds since we recorded part 1, so if you're listening and you haven't heard part 1, you're going to see it linked at the end of the video, but go check this video out. Let's just jump right back in. We've got a lot of good questions here. The next question is, what do you do to prevent thyroid downregulation, and how quickly do you think that occurs on a ketogenic diet? Really good question here.
Yeah, that's one of the backlashes keto gets is if you have, especially like hypothyroidism, a slow thyroid, that you should not do keto. I've actually interviewed a lot of thyroid experts and worked with a lot of clients who have either Hashimoto's thyroiditis or just hypothyroidism, and of course even hyper, but that's more rare. And we've used keto to sensitize the cells, right? Because of what it does to lower inflammation. So the bad rap that keto gets is that typically when somebody shifts into ketosis, their free T3 will drop a little bit. That might happen, but here's the big but. Their cell sensitivity dramatically increases. So there's not a need to produce as much free T3 because it's actually getting into the cell now. Now, every person is going to be different. Somebody who has hypothyroidism needs more days where they're going in and out and flexing in and out versus somebody who doesn't. They could be a little bit more strict and do maybe a couple months, 3 months strict ketosis. But with hypothyroidism, we want to do more flexing. So maybe that looks like, okay, let's shift this person into ketosis for a month, 28 days. Let's sensitize their cells, lower their inflammation, do all the amazing things, and then start having maybe a day or two per week at that point to bump up the carbs to just make some of those hormonal conversions, which, by the way, T4 to T3, insulin helps with that conversion. So we want to do that more periodically versus somebody who doesn't have a thyroid condition. So there's a lot of nuances here, and it'll depend on the person, and constantly looking at those labs helps us make a decision on how much flexing you want to do, how much versus how much keto you want to do. But I will tell you this, keto can be really powerful for somebody who has a hypothyroidism because of what it's doing to lower that cell inflammation. Jason's nodding his head like, yes.
Yeah.
So
Resensitizing that cell to that hormone.
That's it, right? Because it's all about if the actual hormone is getting into the cell, not necessarily the blood levels of the hormones,
right.
But is it actually getting into the cell, right? So Jason, you could talk more about that, but that is the point.
Yeah. No, I mean, I 100% agree with Ben, and I actually asked this question because, you do balance that out, like, right? Like if someone's the more, right now, the only word coming to my head is diseased, but like, I put quotes around it. It's going to take longer to get into ketosis. And then, so I always start worrying like, well, I don't want to give them a flex day yet because I'm not getting the ketones I need and they're not reporting the best energy, but I'm worried about your thyroid. And so it's always just going back in my head. And I have had 3-4 weeks, like Ben was saying, where I've had to keep people in, and then I finally get those carbs in. But, not only does it resensitize that cell, it lowers that inflammation big time. And so, when you're talking about Hashimoto's, one of the key players there is inflammation. You got your stress, inflammation, leaky gut. Usually, your buckets you got to control as a coach for autoimmunity, and you can knock out that inflammation really well going into bouts of ketosis and using that as a tool to clear that cellular inflammation. So that's why I asked that question, but I appreciate the answer. And I like the answer of the resensitizing. That's what I was thinking was probably the right route. So thanks.
Yeah, spot on.
Ben, can you give a real quick example, since we're on part 2, not everyone, maybe they haven't heard part 1. Talk about keto flexing, talk about flexing in and out. And then I've got a real quick short follow-up question for you after that.
Yeah, when I mentioned in part 1, we talked about 93% of Americans being metabolically unhealthy. They're stuck burning sugar. They're in a keto deficiency. They're metabolically inflexible. So they forgot how to burn fat. We get them into ketosis, remind their metabolism, how to burn fat, how to use ketones as an energy source. But then there comes a point where we've repaired that metabolism. We've sensitized their receptor sites for hormones. We've lowered inflammation. We got all these amazing benefits. You've done the work. Now we could actually flex out of ketosis. What keto flex means we're now actually incorporating higher carb days. I call them feast days as well, where you're getting yourself intentionally out of ketosis to burn sugar for that day or for 2 days, to burn sugar instead of fat, because there are two versions of metabolic inflexibility. Most people are stuck burning sugar and they're metabolically inflexible because they're sugar burners. People in the keto space, a lot of my friends and colleagues, they're also metabolically inflexible by only burning fat and ketones, and they forgot how to burn sugar. So a healthy metabolism uses any substrate available and uses that for energy, burn fat, feel good. That substrate could be carbs, fat, protein. That substrate could be our love handles and body fat. That substrate could be sunshine, right? A healthy metabolism could take whatever substrate, use that to produce energy, to burn fat, to feel good. And that is what this concept of the new book that I'm writing is metabolic freedom. That's what it's all about. So keto flexing helps you achieve that. It helps you get the benefits of keto without the drawbacks of long-term ketosis.
Here's my real quick short follow-up question. So I do about 4 weeks of keto, and then I'll bust out, flex out, whatever you want to call it. I'll bust out some carbs, usually pre and post workout. I'll have a nice free meal to kick myself out, store some glycogen. So I'm not going to go back into ketosis the next day. And then I'll have carbs for about 2 weeks, low carbs pre and post, and then I'll jump back in for about 4 weeks at a time. And my labs have looked a lot better on that. Is that something that you would recommend? Do you like that setup, or do you like people to have meals here and there, or do you like periods of times where they're eating carbs for like maybe a week or two or more at a time? What do you like when it comes to flexing out?
I like what you're doing because you know what works for you, right? I want people to get to a point where they figure out their own routine. Now, of course, I'll give people like in Keto Flex different rules to follow, depending on how much weight you want to lose, like the 5-1-1 rule, which is 5 days keto and fasting, 24-hour fast, and then a flex day. And there are different rules, like a 4-2-1 rule. So, but eventually I want them to get to the point where you got to, John, where they understand, like, that's where I'm at too, where I'm actually back into carnivore. I'm doing it for May, so I'm day one of carnivore. But when I'm not doing carnivore, I typically am in ketosis, I don't know, 70% of the time, 30% flexing out. But I kind of do it based off of my exercise demands. If I'm doing a day like yesterday I did cold plunge, swam in my pool, strength training workout, basketball, and then a sauna session, all in the fasted state. So I really created a lot of stress, depleted my glycogen. I was in deep ketosis. Then I had a whole bunch of carbs because I wanted to replenish what I did, and it really helped to recover from the workouts. So I personally base it off of my routine in terms of on active days. Now, this is outside of carnivore. I'm doing carnivore for the next 30 days. So obviously there's no carbs, but outside of that, I do it based off of that. But I like people finding that sweet spot that works for them. What you're doing obviously works for you, John. Eventually, I want people to kind of graduate, but I give them certain rules to follow. And I call it rules, but they're just guidelines to follow until they kind of develop that intuition.
Yeah, I just find it's way more sustainable. It's easier to flex out. I love I'm going to steal that word, but you should have that trademark, Keto Flex. Is it trademarked? Like that needs to be your thing. Only
I know,
thing.
right?
The next question, another good one here. Explain inflammatory fats and what people need to know about saturated, mono, and poly fats, because I don't think a lot of people get it, and rightfully so. Like when you learn about keto, you think, oh, all the fats, right? But help people understand how that ties to inflammation and inflammatory fats. Something I didn't really start paying attention to until just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, arguably these keto fats are even more inflammatory than sugar. And some say even smoking, like Dr. Kate Shanahan, who I've interviewed. She was the nutritionist for the Los Angeles Lakers and Kobe Bryant when he used to play. She's a fantastic resource when it comes to the problem with these seed oils. I'm actually interviewing her tomorrow for her new book called Dark Calories. You guys are going to love that. It comes out in June. Dark Calories. What a great name. And these fats, they're called polyunsaturated fats, the bad ones that I'm referring to. The reason that it's not that they're bad because they're polyunsaturated fats, it's because of the processing that's done to these polyunsaturated fats. So I want to make it clear that not all seed oils are bad, not all polyunsaturated fats are bad. It's when they are processed that makes them bad because they're very unstable. And without getting too geeky, unless you want me to, the chemical structure of these fats have a lot of these double bonds. That's why the word poly means many. So they contain many double bonds. And when a fat contains a lot of these double bonds that are closely located to each other. It makes them really unstable and reactive to heat. So when they take these fats like canola oil, corn oil, cottonseed oil, soybean oil, and some others, and they process it at high heat temperatures, these fats go rancid. They stink and they look rancid. So they actually add chemical agents and detergents to make it not smell and to make it look clear. They put it into a bottle and they ship it to your grocery store. And the biggest fake news organization in America, the American Heart Association, puts their stamp of approval on it saying they're heart healthy when they're the exact opposite of heart healthy. They are highly inflammatory. They stay in your body for years. The half-life of them is 680 days, meaning if you stop eating them today, half of them will be in your body fat, cell membrane, mitochondrial membrane 680 days later. That's how dangerous they are. You compare those to saturated fats. The benefits of saturated fats, no double bonds, very stable. So these are going to be fats like butter, ghee, beef tallow, duck fat, lard from healthy cows. Like saturated fats are great cooking fats. And then monounsaturated fats, which are more typically plant fruit-based fats like olive oil and avocado oil, are also great because they only have one double bond, monounsaturated fat. So those could be great for like salad dressings and dips. Those are much stable. So just to your point, John, just because something is keto friendly does not make it health friendly. And I would argue that those polyunsaturated fats are even more inflammatory than consuming sugar.
Yeah, it's
What's
interesting. I
the best
remember.
oil to cook with? Is it coconut oil or do you like the ghee best?
I like to rotate my fats. I usually rotate between butter, beef tallow, and coconut oil.
Okay.
But in general, animal fats are the most stable and the best for cooking. So butter, ghee, tallow, duck fat, and lard are probably gonna be the best options for cooking.
Got it. So if you're out at a restaurant and you have to choose between extra virgin olive oil to cook with, what they're going to use, and just good old butter, which are you asking for?
They have butter. I'm going to go with the butter. If they don't have butter and they have olive oil that's not cut with the seed oil, I'll go with that.
Yep.
And sometimes they don't have either. So they kind of have to get creative and ask them to grill things or ask them what's safe on the menu. You guys know that I tell the server I'm allergic. When we go to dinner, Jason, we'll do the same thing. Yep. Yeah, I have the card actually right here, the seed oil allergy. I'll give you a few more on Friday. So your audience get this for free, which is seedoilcard.com. It's just a printout and it shows the bad oils. And it tells the chef, I'm allergic to these. I don't want an inflammatory response. Please cook with the safe oils. And it has a list of the safe oils. So I'm always showing this at restaurants and it works really well. I don't want to take that hit because, like I said, it's 680 days and half of them will be in your body. It's crazy.
Damn.
It's great. I remember hearing you use an apple as an explanation as far as oxidation. Do you mind breaking that down I think that's great for our listeners to hear, when it comes to oxidation and then kind of using it as the example you just talked about with all the different fats.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great catch there. Yeah. So when you bite into an apple, if I bit into an apple right here in front of you guys, and I left it on the counter here on my desk and came back 3 hours, 4 hours later and looked at the part that I bit, it turns brown, right? We see that with apples, avocados, it starts to oxidize. This is essentially the same thing that's happening to our cells when we eat these bad fats. It's oxidizing, it's rusting. It's like a car sitting out on the lot for 30 years, rusting in the sun. That's what's happening at the cell level with these fats. They're really difficult to get rid of. They stick around for a long time. They create a whole bunch of inflammation. And it's just unfortunate that organizations like the American Heart Association is giving their stamp of approval because it's all about money for them. It's just all a big cash flow machine for them, for people to consume it, but it's the complete opposite of what they should be consuming.
Speaking of raws, are you a fan of methylene blue? Do you use it at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I love methylene blue. You been using it?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Anything I can do to improve the cell integrity at this point in my life, I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to be running labs every 6 weeks to see things I'm working on. So it'll be fun stuff. I don't have it all out yet, but yeah.
That's cool. There's methylene, there's a whole like debate out there with people who take methylene blue, who love methylene blue, and then people who love nitric oxide because they're opposing. Methylene blue lowers nitric oxide negates methylene blue. And I've interviewed like experts on both topics. And it's always so fascinating, Jason, because like Both of them make compelling arguments.
Arguments, right?
Right. It's like methylene blue says, no, never take nitric oxide. Nitric oxide says, no, never take methylene blue. So to me, I know the answer is in the middle, and both are great when you cycle them, right? I think they're both great. When I take methylene blue and I combine it with red light, like, oh my gosh, my brain is on fire in a good way. I'm just like super focused. So I'll be curious to see what it does to your labs.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't plan on doing it. I was going to do like 8 weeks on, 8 weeks off, different things like that. So it'll be interesting. We'll see.
Yeah, we could talk about that when I interview you as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry for the tangent there, John. Back on keto.
No, you're all good. I'm just making a mental note to do an episode on that. I think that'd be great at some point down the road. Interesting question here. Can someone store keto salts as fat? Can they ingest BHB salts, exogenous ketones? Can they actually store ketones as fat?
I don't think so. I mean, I can't give you a concrete answer here. I haven't really dug into
I've never been
science.
able to find that anywhere. No one I've ever asked. None of the research, like I cannot find that answer.
It would make sense that the body would not store it as fat. It would use it as an energy source. But if you're, and I'm not against ketone salts at all. Actually, in Keto Flex second edition, I included a whole section on exogenous ketones and the benefits and the different types, salts, esters, and butanediol, and all the benefits that it comes with. But I don't like this about exogenous ketones, all of them. I don't like when the focus is only about taking exogenous ketones and not doing the work to get your metabolism producing those ketones. It's the only thing that I don't like, especially with, I'm not going to name companies, but there's some companies out there that say you don't have to eat a keto diet. You just have to, take ketones, and they will benefit doing that, but they're not going to get the benefits of reshaping their metabolism by actually getting into ketosis the right way. But I don't think so. To answer your question, I would have to dig a little bit deeper. I would doubt that taking ketone salts or any type of exogenous ketones will be stored as body fat. You would have to take an excessive amount maybe to even accomplish that. But why would you want to even do that? So I don't know. If you find anything, let me know.
Yeah, since they're fractionated fats, it's an interesting topic, and I've never, like, literally the world's experts, you're up there with them. I've never been able to find the answer, so I figured I'd throw it out there. So if you're listening and you do know the answer, chime in the comments below. If you're on YouTube, we would all love to know.
Please teach
John,
us.
The only times I've ever, I use our essential energy like you're doing, sipping on right now. I just got back from training not long ago. So I use that obviously for steady energy. And then if I'm dieting, I'll use it for a pick me up for my brain. But I'm in such a deficit. I never even thought about the fact that it would store. Do you know what I mean? I was just like, hey, this is going to burn for energy and I'm brain dead right now. I don't know. I've never even looked it up. I have no clue. It's a novel idea though, but I have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, whenever I do keto, I'm not really dieting. I'm actually in a surplus, and I take it because I get great energy. I get great pumps, mental clarity. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, if I'm eating, because I can literally eat 3,500 calories on keto and not gain fat. If I ate that in a carb-based diet, I'd be a fat ass.
Yeah,
so
perfect example. Yeah.
So I don't know. It's always super interesting, but I don't know, maybe one day we'll know. I see a hell of a question written down here from Kayla. Can people without gallbladders use keto since they can't break down fats as efficiently? Damn good question, Kayla.
Yeah, Kayla, great question. That's a question I get a lot when people who want to join my academy and they don't have a gallbladder, they're concerned that they can't do it. The good news is that you can if you don't have a gallbladder. There's just some considerations to implement. So the liver produces bile. The gallbladder stores that bile. And how it works is when we eat fat, if you had a gallbladder, when we eat fat, there's a hormone called cholecystokinin, which signals to the gallbladder to squeeze, to kind of go in and then release bile. And then it processes the fat, breaks down the fat like a detergent. Now, without a gallbladder, you don't have the storage house. So the liver has to pick up the slack. So the name of the game is to do everything possible to support that liver, right? You could use Jason's products. You could do coffee enemas. You could do the bitters that I mentioned before, really important. You're probably going to need a supplement that has ox bile in it, its own bile, to allow your body to get familiar with the amount of fat you're increasing. And you probably want to go slower with your keto approach. So I have a protocol in my academy for this. It's a 5-step protocol. In the book, Keto Flex second edition, there's also a protocol that I put there for keto without a gallbladder. And one of those things is to avoid having big meals, big keto meals in the beginning. So of course, I want people to have an eating window and a fasting window. But if you don't have a gallbladder and you start eating and condensing your keto meals into, let's say, 2 meals, you have 2 big keto meals, you're going to get diarrhea and loose stools because you just haven't made that shift yet. So instead, you actually want to eat smaller meals more frequently for 2 to 3 weeks that are keto friendly to spread out those fats, include bitters with those meals, take some liver support supplements, take ox bile before those meals. And week by week or day by day, the liver starts to adapt and adjust. And maybe after 3 weeks or so, you could then have a bigger keto meal in a shorter window, 2 meals maybe, and then you're totally fine. So there are considerations there. It can be done. You just want to make sure you kind of spread those fats out and support the liver. Supporting the liver is the name of the game there.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. Kayla, you've got unless you have any other follow-ups on that one, you've got another question here about menopause and perimenopause if you want to ask that one.
No follow-ups on that. I just, as we were talking about the gallbladder stuff in the last episode, it just kind of popped into my head. I've never run into this myself, but just for future notice, like that's really good to know. But no, for women in menopause and perimenopause, I've been starting to get a few more women coming into this phase of their life. And, a lot of them come to me trying to do keto and it's not working. So is this something that is useful for them at some point, like we had talked about previously with like getting cortisol down, getting hormones in a good spot, and then shifting to keto? And so can they use that, to maintain or lose weight? And then is that sustainable with maybe like the keto flex portion?
Yeah, Kayla, absolutely. Keto Flex has worked well. I have a lot of menopausal ladies and perimenopausal ladies in my academy. So I got to use them as like some data points to see what works and what doesn't work. And in the book Keto Flex, the second edition, there's also an entire section on this as well. When we think about that transition from menstruating to perimenopause to eventually postmenopause, it's interesting that menopause is just one day. It's classified as 12 months without a period. That one day is considered menopause, and then every day after that's considered postmenopause. It's an interesting categorization there. But during postmenopause, when a woman makes that transition, one of the major shifts is the ovaries now calls it quits because it's done its job. It needs to retire, and rightfully so. So then the adrenal glands and different things pick up the slack for what the ovaries were doing. So at this time, it is very important to support the adrenal glands. It's very important to master stress. It's important to get vitamin G, focus on sleep, find hobbies and activities that you enjoy doing to get oxytocin and everything you can do to get into that parasympathetic state. What I recommend to my postmenopausal ladies out there that I have been working with and those listening and watching is to find a way to track your heart rate variability. And I spoke about this in Nashville. Your heart rate variability is important for everybody to track, but especially a postmenopausal and perimenopausal woman, because what it's doing, it's showing you how healthy your nervous system is. And we have 2 primary branches of the nervous system. We have that fight or flight sympathetic branch, which is adrenaline and cortisol. And that is amazing in short spurts. You don't want to be locked there. And the other side is the parasympathetic branch, which is rest, digest, detoxification. Also very important, but you don't want to be locked in only parasympathetic. So a healthy nervous system goes back and forth between sympathetic, parasympathetic, kind of like metabolic flexibility for the nervous system flexibility. And when you are doing this the right way, you're going to see your heart rate variability increase. We want our heart rate variability to increase. That means you're getting a good response between those 2 primary branches. But if you see your HRV decrease, then you're too much in sympathetic and you want to balance that out. So depending on that HRV score, we could be more, if it's a good score and it's progressing up, we could be more aggressive with keto, more aggressive with fasting. If we see it trend the other way, then we need to do more feasting, less fasting, and work on the adrenal glands. And I would say this on the note of heart rate variability, everybody has a different heart rate variability score. So you cannot compare your HRV to somebody else's because it's very, very different. Genetics do play a big role there versus like blood glucose and blood ketones. That is easy to compare. But with HRV, it's really unique to the person. So I would recommend to track your HRV for 7 days. And you could use an Oura Ring, which I have on here, an Apple Watch, a Whoop Band, or whatever, maybe even a Fitbit might do it, and get 7 days worth of data of your heart rate variability. Get your average. So let's say your average in this example is 27 MS, which is what it's going to give you, an MS score. Let's say your average for 7 days is 27. That's your baseline. Then what you could do, you want to work on increasing that to 33, 35, 40. On the days that it's increasing, those are good keto and fasting days. Those are good cold plunge days, sauna days, good hormetic stressor days. But if you see it start to drop from 27 to 24 or 21, less fasting, more feasting, less keto, more keto flexing. So using that as a gauge really helps out.
Very, very interesting. We've got another one here, and then we may try and squeeze in a couple, Kayla, Jason, if you guys can think of anything else. This next one, I'm excited for this. Jason, I believe this came from you, and I've got a theory on this, Ben. I want to see what you think of this. So first, the question: why do some people rarely see ketones above 0.5, but they feel amazing and they seem to be in ketosis, but they're not reading high ketones? Can you explain that, or what do you think that is?
Yeah, I see that a lot. It's actually a really good thing. There's two types of things that happen when you do keto. There's two primary factors at play here. There is the fat adaptation that occurs in the beginning. So when you're burning carbs and sugar, you're not fat adapted. You're burning sugar. When you shift into ketosis, those first 7 or 14 days, you're now getting fat adapted, where your body's burning fat instead of sugar. So that happens fairly quickly. Then there's a different process called keto adaptation. Keto adaptation is the reshaping of different physiological systems in your body. Essentially, that means your mitochondria and your cells are now really efficient and primed at using those ketones. So somebody who's fat adapted, they will see their ketones 0.7, 0.8, 1.5, 2.0. If you start doing longer fast, 3.0. I've gotten mine to as high as 5.4 during a 5-day fast. When you're keto adapted, you won't have those high levels of ketones. And that is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing because your cells are actually using the ketones. So it won't show up when you get the reading. And that just means your cells are sucking them up and using them for energy. So you feel great. So that is the goal, to get somebody keto adapted. And you'll typically see lower blood ketones, but they'll feel better. And that is the goal. I know some people, they think they want more ketones, and more ketones are better, and they chase ketones. But just like you don't chase glucose, you don't chase ketones. You want to be able to use those ketones. So to your point, John, this example is somebody who's keto adapted and they're using those ketones really efficiently.
Okay.
This was because of me. I track, I use the Keto Mojo, and I just recently did about 4 to 5 weeks of keto, and I felt amazing. But it would be 0.5 like every freaking time. And the only thing I can come up with is I'm just that efficient. Maybe I hit 1 or 2 at some point. Maybe it was in my sleep and I just never see it. And then it's like 0.5 just always. But I feel amazing. So I'm like, I gotta be in ketosis. So I like that explanation. I just called it efficiency, but it's the mitochondrial efficiency. I mean, of course. So makes full sense.
Here's a theory.
Exactly
Here's a theory I have. I just want to run this by you, but what you just said actually makes a lot of sense. So I just learned something extremely important. But I've always thought, imagine the skinny 19-year-old that can eat pizza, drink soda, do whatever, can't gain any weight, right? Like that person that can eat 5,000-6,000 calories a day, never gain weight, right? The hard gainer. And then you've got someone like me. I can be extremely fat in a heartbeat. And I've always thought, well, people like me respond better to a ketogenic diet because insulin's going to be lower. Your insulin sensitivity is better. And I've always, whenever I check my ketones, I always run 0.5. Sometimes it's even hard to show up. And I thought, well, that's just because I'm very efficient. It wasn't so much about how long I was keto adapted and fat adapted. I just respond very well to that. Where I've also had some of my other clients that have very fast metabolisms. When I've switched them to keto, their ketones remain high for weeks and weeks. They're seeing a 2.5 and a 3.0. And I always thought about it. I thought, well, they can burn glucose and they're very efficient at that, but they're having trouble burning fats. I don't know if that's really a thing. It was always a theory, kind of like I'm the opposite. I'm that person that can eat all the fats and not really gain weight, where I can't do that with carbs. But you see somebody that can eat all the carbs and soda and all that stuff and never gain weight. You put them on a ketogenic diet and their body just kind of rebels. At least that's what I've seen, but it's never been for longer than 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables with ketones, right? There's a lot of things that influence those ketones: poor sleep, stress, your exercise, and muscle mass. Different things will affect that. And I've seen different things, and I know a lot of my students, they kind of get fixated with one ketone reading or two ketone readings. And I always tell them, don't pay attention to a couple readings, pay attention to trends, right? So week after week, what is it trending towards? How do you feel? And I think that is more important than just chasing numbers. I like the idea of checking glucose and ketones in the beginning, and I recommend that, but I don't want to be fixated on those numbers. Like, to Jason, to your point, you feel great and you're at 0.5. It's like, okay, well, then what matters? Like, you want to feel good. Who cares if it's not 2.0, right? You feel good. Same thing for you, John. Like, you feel good even at 0.5, 0.7. And on the note of the fast metabolism thing, a lot of people, well, in reality, the metabolism doesn't really work in speeds. It's either efficient or inefficient.
Yeah.
But when we think about, you ask most people and they want to, and I'm guilty of making videos, how do you boost your metabolism and all that, just because it gets people watching or listening. But in reality, you're not boosting, you're just making it more efficient. But a lot of people want to boost their metabolism. They want a faster metabolism, but that is not the goal. The goal is to have an efficient metabolism. Animals that are in the wilderness that have fast metabolisms have the shortest lifespan, because they're constantly creating so much free radicals, so much damage. We don't want a fast metabolism. We want an efficient metabolism. And that means you're able to use the substrates available. So sugar, fat, carbs, sunlight, body fat. So the metabolic flexibility is the name of the game, not necessarily trying to speed up the metabolism or boosting the metabolism. Although I get it, like, that's the language people hear and it gets them engaged into a conversation. But in reality, we're talking about efficient metabolism or inefficient metabolism.
Couple real quick follow-ups. If you all have any more questions on the note of measuring ketones, what do you like to recommend? And I'm going to link this in the show notes here.
Yeah, measuring ketones. So there's 3 different ways, right? There's 3 different ketone bodies. There's acetone, which the breath expels. There is acetoacetate, which the urine expels. And then there's beta hydroxybutyrate, which you test in the blood. Out of those 3 ways to test, I'm not a fan of urine testing. It's the most affordable, those urine strips. But to our point, which we just discussed, when your cells are actually efficient at using ketones, the acetoacetate ketone body won't spill out in that urine, give you a false negative thinking you're not in ketosis. So it might be useful, those urine strips, for the first couple of days or a week or so, but after that, I'm not a fan of them. It's funny because a couple of years ago, I spoke at a Keto Orlando Summit, and I was talking about this exact topic and how I'm not a fan of urine strips. And after my lecture, I realized there was a vendor selling urine strips for ketones. I'm like, oh, I never want to disrespect the vendor. I would have never talked about it if that was the case, but I was able to have a conversation with them, but I don't know if they appreciated my thoughts on it. And then we have the breath. The benefits of a breath meter is that you don't have to prick your finger. The drawback is that you don't get a glucose reading. And for breath, I like a company called Biosense. They make a really good breath meter. I have a code with them, which is KetoCamp, for, I believe, $20 off your Biosense device. And I've used their device, but the gold standard is blood. Keto Mojo is what I use. It gives you both glucose and ketones. Jason, are you using Keto Mojo as well?
I am.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Keto Mojo is great. That's what I use, because you could use the same finger prick that you draw your blood for the ketone strip for the glucose strip as well. And then it gives you both. And you get some really good data looking at both glucose and ketone. So beta hydroxybutyrate is the only ketone body out of the 3 that actually crosses the blood-brain barrier. So it is the gold standard, I believe, for testing ketones. Now, what's really cool is that, you know how we have continuous glucose monitors? They're releasing continuous ketone monitors really soon. And then they're also going to be releasing dual monitors where it gives you continuous glucose and ketones. Like, that's going to be phenomenal.
Yes. Very cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What follow-up? You guys have any follow-up questions or anything you want to talk about before we wrap this up?
I guess my only question beyond that, everything that we've talked about, was just like, when you start measuring ketones, when you're trying to get into ketosis, do you measure like kind of daily as you do that to see how they're getting into it, or do you just measure once a week? What's like the best way to do that to ensure like accurate readings as well?
Yeah, the best way, Kayla, would be daily, maybe a couple times per day. For blood ketones, you want to hit 0.5 to around 2.0. That's going to be different for everybody, but somewhere between 0.5 and 2.0 is a good sweet spot. Once you're at 0.5, you're in ketosis. It's like your body's producing ketones. 0.3, 0.4, there are trace amounts, but not full on ketosis. And then same thing, test your glucose at the same time just to get both readings. But in the beginning, I would recommend every day, twice a day, just to kind of get an idea of trends and where it's going. And then eventually you get to a point like me where I'm at right now, where I don't even test ketones because I just know when I'm in ketosis based off of how I feel and kind of go by how I feel.
Yeah, that's super cool. I've never actually done keto. I just have never needed to, like, or had any sort of issues with insulin. So I'm curious to, at some point, I will probably try it just so I know what it feels like to get into that and stuff and just use myself as an experiment, of course. But no, it's fun learning about all this. Like, I definitely learned a lot, even from listening in Nashville and now here too. So thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome, Kayla. And if you do keto, let me know how it goes for you.
Hey, John, I have one follow-up.
Yeah, go for it.
Wrap something up. Kind of a softball for Ben, I think. But why don't we let our listeners know why there's something out there called bodybuilder keto, which is higher protein, and why that might not be the best way to go about getting into ketosis, why the higher protein's a problem. And then at what point, though, do you feel when someone is adapted, when can you raise protein?
Yeah, that's really good. If you would have asked me this question 3 years ago, I would have had a different answer than I have today. A lot of people think of keto as a high-fat diet, eating a lot of fat. And that doesn't give you the full picture of what keto really is. In the beginning, though, I do believe in eating a lot of healthy fat and getting your body familiar with breaking down fat, the fatty acids, and getting ketones going. Those fats really help with that. What I teach is once the person is fat adapted, meaning they're in ketosis 7 days in a row, then we actually dial down the fat, and the protein is the focus now at this point, where they're aiming to get 1 gram of protein per pound of their ideal body weight. And they're only consuming the fats that are coming naturally with that protein. They're not hitting a certain fat macronutrient threshold or a percentage. They're focusing on that protein and keeping their carbs under whatever that threshold is for them to stay in ketosis. And I've noticed that when they do that, they lose more fat, they feel better, they're able to perform in the gym better. So it's not, I wouldn't consider that a high protein focused approach. It's just getting enough protein to pretty much do the job that we wanted to do, which is to maintain and build lean muscle mass. So that's what I do, Jason, after 7 days of fat adaptation, dial down the fat and focus on getting that protein requirement.
Got it.
Jason, I want to add something here real quick. This is something I've been wanting to tell you about. It's just, I've recently just done this. Ben, I'll be curious to see what you think. So typically I'm right along with you. I like to recommend 1 gram of protein per pound of lean mass for physique athletes and physique enthusiasts, bodybuilders, right? Somewhere close to what you're talking about. And before, whenever I would do keto, and most of my clients, they're in a deficit, they're in a fat loss stage. So, I didn't want protein to go too high so it wouldn't convert over into carbs and they feel like shit. Well, this last run that I did, it was about 8 weeks. This has been a couple months ago. I was in a surplus and I thought, you know what? I feel like eating more protein. So I went from 180 grams like normal when I diet and I went to 240. I kind of do what Jason's always done these years. Jason, you've always been a higher protein keto guy. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. And my theory is, and this is what I believe, I felt amazing. And I was actually able to gain a couple pounds on keto, which I've never been able to gain on keto. So I gained a couple pounds, but I felt great. And my theory is because I'm not in a deficit, I'm not low on a fuel source, my body wasn't turning the extra protein. It wasn't actually extra protein. It wasn't turning it into carbohydrates. It wasn't turning it into glucose because I was in a surplus. What do you think about that? I know what I felt. I know I felt great. And I think maybe for bodybuilding keto, for people that are trying to grow, it's always been lower proteins not optimal on keto for growth. But if you're in a surplus, I was able to gain and feel pretty damn good.
Yeah, I've seen that as well. I love that you did that experiment. What ends up happening is there is a certain percentage of the protein that gets converted into glucose via gluconeogenesis. But the big but is that that's just going to refill your glycogen stores. So it's estimated that for every 100 grams of protein you consume, about 60%, so 60 grams of it is converted into gluconeogenesis. But if you have a good amount of muscle mass and you already have depleted your glycogen stores and you're really metabolically flexible, that conversion into glucose just goes back and to refill those glycogen stores. So you feel great. You're not elevating your blood sugar levels. You're not lowering your ketones. And that I think is great. I'm a big fan of it. I'm a big fan of a protein focused approach as well. Again, 3 years ago, I thought too much protein creates too much gluconeogenesis, kicks you out of ketosis. And then I did extensive testing on this and I realized this is not the case for somebody who's metabolically flexible. And especially for somebody like you, John, who has a good amount of muscle mass, you're just going to use it to refill that and it's not going to be a problem.
Very interesting. We're always learning. That's the good thing about, myself, Jason, and Kayla. We're always trying and learning and trying to pass stuff on to the listeners. And we've really enjoyed having you on the show. Here's the thing. We could keep going and going and going. I think between part 1 and part 2, we've got about 15 questions in here. So we hope our listeners have enjoyed that. Of course, if you're listening, you can always check out the show notes. You can find Ben at benazadi.com. You can check out his Keto Flex book, which you have a new version that should be out. I'm gonna release this in a couple days, Ben. So I think you've got, what is it, version 2.0 that's out now?
Yeah, second edition will be out in it says 72 hours to process. We just submitted it today. So hopefully by the time this episode is out, the book will be out over at ketoflexbook.com.
Perfect. I'll drop this on like a Friday or Saturday. That way it's perfect timing for you and help get some eyeballs over there. So ketoflexbook.com. For myself, Ben, Kayla, and Jason, we're out of here. See you guys.
Yeah.
Bye.